7 days. That was all it took. 7 days undercover as a new hire to witness just how far things had unraveled. He hadn't expected perfection. He didn't even expect excellence. But what he found was something far more corrosive than laziness or incompetence. It was cruelty. Casual, daily, and ingrained in the very rhythm of the workplace. He saw a young woman stifling tears behind a stack of inventory boxes, her silent sobs echoing louder than any reprimand. He heard the sharp crack of laughter as someone mocked her for a mistake that wasn't even hers. An old man sat hunched over a meager lunch. The way his shoulders curled inward seemed like a defense against a world that had forgotten him. These weren't isolated incidents. This wasn't a bad day. This was the culture rotted from within. So he made a decision, one that would send shockwaves through his entire leadership team. Because when the disease runs deep, you don't trim the branches, you cut the whole limb. And for the next 39 minutes, he would unravel the truth, behind why he had no other choice. Standing in front of the employee locker, he held the faded blue uniform in his hands. The name patch was barely stitched on, like a forgotten afterthought. Slowly, deliberately, he slid his gold watch from his wrist and placed it gently on the steel shelf. The clink of metal against metal sounded like a door locking behind him. This company was his creation, brick by brick. He remembered the first office, just a desk, a dream, and the bitter coffee he brewed himself. Now, the machine ran without him. Profits were stable, reviews seemed fine. But there was a chill in the air, a silence that numbers never revealed. He buttoned up the shirt, laced up the nondescript shoes, and walked into the world he had built with no title, no corner office, just another cog in the system. As he scanned the room filled with lockers and fluorescent lights, one thought pierced the quiet. If this culture was sick, it started with him. No one acknowledged him when he stepped onto the floor. Conversations continued, chairs scraped, a mop was tossed toward him without a word. He waited for instructions that never came. A younger employee brushed past him, eyes dull. "Figure it out," the man muttered. The last guy quit, couldn't take it. He muttered whatever it took to escape, the air thickened. Every movement he made felt observed, not with concern but with judgment, boredom. He was already a burden. He asked basic questions, where to find supplies, how to clock in, but only received indifferent shrugs or cold silence. One woman scoffed and walked away, so he worked in silence, pretending not to feel the sting of isolation. But the message was clear. Here, you're alone, and no one cares if you sink or swim. By the end of the shift, exhaustion settled deep in his bones, and with it, a growing understanding. He dragged the mop across the wrong part of the floor deliberately. A small test. Within seconds, a voice pierced the air. "Seriously?" "It's not even your zone," loud enough to draw attention, loud enough to ignite laughter. He bent down to adjust the bucket. It tipped. Water spilled across the tile. Someone whistled. "If you're this bad on day one," another snickered, "might as well quit now." Laughter followed, not warm but weaponized. No one helped. No one offered a towel. They just watched, arms crossed, faces smug. He wiped the floor alone. On the outside, he played the fool. On the inside, he collected every detail. These weren't just bullies. They were enforcers of a broken code. Later, near the break room, he accidentally knocked over a stack of folders, papers scattered, some sliding beneath chairs. He knelt, picking them up slowly. No one moved. A woman looked over, then back at her phone. A man across the room pulled out his phone, whispered to a colleague. She laughed. "New guy's killing it," he said, filming, clown mode. The words weren't loud, but they were meant to bruise. He kept his head down, hands shaking slightly. Someone stepped over him without speaking. Mockery hovered in the air like static. Then, something different. A hand reached down beside him, holding one of the scattered pages. "Careful with that corner," the man said. "Get slick fast. I've slipped there myself." He looked up, an older worker, gray hair tucked under a faded cap. No smile, no pity, just honesty. "They give everyone a hard time at first," the man added. "Don't let it get to you. Been here 15 years, still not one of them." There was no bitterness in his tone, just weary truth, the kind that lingers. They cleaned the mess together in silence. Then the man walked away, leaving behind something stronger than kindness: recognition. Later he found that same man eating lunch alone near the loading dock, a torn paper bag, a plastic fork poking through the side. He wasn't talking, just chewing with practiced rhythm. Then, without looking up, he spoke. 15 years, never missed a shift, still passed over, still told to stay in my lane. He pulled a napkin from his pocket. It tore as he wiped his face. He folded the damp edge and kept wiping. "Zim, I don't say it," he murmured, "but you feel it, like you're invisible." The younger man, still undercover, sat silently. There was nothing to say, nothing that would mend it. But the image stuck. A loyal worker, forgotten, wiping sweat with paper too thin to hold dignity. That night, away from the noise, he sat alone, hands resting on his knees. The day replayed in flashes, mocking laughter, dismissive glances, that torn napkin. This wasn't a bad team. This was something colder, systemic. Where had it started? He thought about the layers of leadership, the blind faith he'd placed in spreadsheets. Metrics couldn't measure malice. Numbers didn't capture silence. Maybe they weren't just mistreating people. Maybe they were trained to. Shane clamped his jaw tight. Not anger. Shame. Because if this was the culture, then part of him had laid its foundation. And just when he thought he had seen the worst, he found her. She was curled behind storage racks, arms wrapped around a cardboard box. Inside were her belongings: an ID badge, a water bottle, a notebook still blank. Tears streaked silently down her cheeks. She didn't look up. Shame had already made her small. Someone had accused her of being slow, then rude, then careless. 3 days in, she was told it wasn't working out. No warning, no help. "I just wanted to do it right," she whispered to no one. He watched from a distance, heart heavy. That box looked too large for her arms, or maybe it was the weight of what they'd taken from her. This wasn't failure, this was a setup. The next morning, near the time clock, he overheard them. Voices, low, confident, practiced. She clocked out 10 minutes late, on purpose. "Told you," another said. "They always think they're smarter than the system." But he'd seen her stay late, trying to finish alone. The truth didn't matter. They weren't telling a story. They were shaping a narrative. Fast, efficient, and false. They called it protecting the team, but it wasn't. It was control. Through whispers, through false reports, through the quiet assurance that no one would question them. A younger worker stood nearby. He heard it all, said nothing. And that silence hit harder than any lie, because silence was the shield that let the rot grow unnoticed. And in this place, silence wasn't just a habit, it was law. They called themselves the core team, always in the back, always loud, always untouched by the grind. When work came, they passed it off. "Give it to the new guy," one sneered. "Let him earn that paycheck." And they laughed, but this time, the man they mocked wasn't a new hire. He was the one holding the scissors, ready to cut the limb. The laughter echoed again, louder this time, like a verdict being handed down. No one objected. No one intervened. The system didn't just tolerate cruelty, it rewarded it. He watched a younger worker struggle to move heavy crates, ones clearly marked for two-person lifts. The kid winced with every step, a slight limp betraying either an old injury or the strain of being asked to do too much for too long. But he didn't stop. He couldn't afford to. The elite group comfortably leaned against shelves, chatting, eyes half-lidded from boredom. Didn't even glance his way. When he asked a supervisor why this was allowed, the answer came without hesitation, like muscle memory. They've been here longer. They know how to manage themselves. But this wasn't self-management. It was avoidance, cloaked in seniority, privilege unchecked. He watched the younger man grimace through the strain, and the weight on his shoulders wasn't just physical anymore. It was the suffocating realization that effort didn't equal respect here. The anger inside him burned deeper. It no longer felt like performance. It was real. Then he saw her. By the clock-out sheet, her name, again, night shift, 6 days in a row. She moved quietly, always arriving early, her shoulders sagging with a tiredness that no amount of sleep could erase. Her eyes carried the dull ache of someone who had stopped expecting kindness. Near the break room, someone made a loud joke. Just loud enough. Maybe if she smiled more, she'd be back on days. She didn't answer, just gripped her lunch bag tighter and disappeared around the corner. He asked a lead about the scheduling, why she was on nights non-stop. The reply came with a knowing smirk. She keeps to herself. Doesn't really blend with the team. We rotate based on chemistry. Chemistry. That was the word they used to cover exclusion. It wasn't rotation. It was exile disguised as policy. A way to remove someone without ever saying it out loud. Here, silence was the sharpest weapon of all. Later that shift, he was handed a clipboard and pointed toward a pallet clearly marked for 2. No help, no explanation, just a nod. He adjusted his grip and lifted. The strain hit instantly. Sweat rolled down his neck, soaked into the collar. Still, no one offered help. Instead, behind him, low voices snickered. Let him feel it, someone murmured. Give the old guy a taste of the bottom, another added. He'll quit by Friday. He'd wired a mic into his badge that morning, just in case. Now it captured everything. The words, the tone, the strategy. They weren't punishing an unknown man. They were reinforcing a hierarchy, a cruel ritual masked as workplace banter. His shoulders ached, but it wasn't the crates. It was the weight of knowing what this place had become. So he left the bin half-labeled, deliberately, to see what would happen. By lunch, the whispers had started. Is sloppy? He's slowing us down. It wasn't concern, it was orchestration. Later, he saw a phone screen over someone's shoulder. A group chat. Private. Not company-sanctioned. At the top, clean sweep. Messages poured in. Vote to push him out? Yep. Same way we got rid of Lisa. Make it uncomfortable, he'll bounce. He memorized the names, the emojis, the digital thumbs up to exile. No manager in sight. No HR policy. Just a self-regulated ecosystem of exclusion. Not bullying. Something worse. Something organized. And it worked. Because no one was watching. Until now. She sat at her desk, fingers trembling as they hovered over the keyboard. The subject line read, Incident Report. Her eyes flicked across the room, scanning for threats. Then she typed. A full account. Names, times, words spoken loud enough to wound. She clicked send. An hour later, she checked the system. The video feed from that hour gone, corrupted. No backup, no explanation. She stared at the blank playback window, breath tight. Across the room, a supervisor met her gaze, gave a slow, smug smile, then turned away. She didn't file another report, didn't speak up again. Because in this place, speaking up didn't just get ignored. It got erased. He saw it. He saw the hesitation in another young worker's eyes, the way his hand hovered before punching out, the way his mouth opened, then closed again. Later, near the supply room, the truth slipped from his lips in a whisper. I saw what they did to her. It wasn't right. Before he could say more, a voice from behind a stack of boxes cut in. Flat. Final. You want to lose your job too? Not a question. A warning. The younger man froze, eyes wide. He nodded and backed away. Silence wasn't just survival. It was currency, and every time someone stayed quiet, the system grew stronger, more immune. He watched the old man again, quiet, efficient, cleaning a spill someone else ignored, stacking boxes someone else left behind, wiping counters no one cared about, not because it was his job, but because it needed to be done. A younger worker leaned against the wall, scrolling his phone, unmoved, as the old man mopped around his shoes. No thanks, no acknowledgement. Later, a cruel joke floated across the lockers. Still trying to prove yourself, Grandpa. The old man didn't react, just folded the mop, returned it to the cart, and walked out. His silence wasn't surrender. It was experience. Years of being overlooked had taught him. Hard work doesn't matter if the room refuses to see you. He always ate alone. Same seat, same sandwich in a plastic bag, half an apple, a water bottle with the label peeling off. On the other side of the break room, laughter exploded over shared memes and videos, none of it for him. He pulled a napkin from his pocket, thin, public use, half damp from condensation, and wiped his forehead. Folded it, used the dry edge for his mouth, eyes never lifting. Not shame, habit. He didn't eat fast, he didn't eat slow, he just existed, like a shadow in plain sight. And at that moment, the truth landed heavier than ever. Loyalty here didn't earn you respect. It earned you exile. He rose earlier that morning, sat on the edge of the rented cot, uniform still wrinkled from yesterday. In his hand, a clip-on mic, barely the size of a quarter. He fastened it under his collar. This wasn't just curiosity now. This was justice. They weren't careless. They were strategic. And they weren't acting alone. He walked into the warehouse, same as always. Same tired eyes. Same slow pace. But now, every word mattered. Behind a half-glowed door near the back shelf, they laughed again. Another one down, someone said, tossing a paper towel. He quit. Yep. Third this month. Easy. Then came the sentence that sealed it. Man, we're getting good at this. That's 5 now. Love watching them fold. A pause. Lately I don't even have to try. They break themselves. Laughter. A slap on the back. No remorse. Just triumph. He didn't move. Didn't breathe too loud. The mic caught everything. Finally, it wasn't just stories. It was proof. And then it happened. A dispute during shift change, task assignments. A quiet employee spoke up, calmly, pointed at the schedule. Wasn't I supposed to restock this aisle? He wasn't accusing, just clarifying. One of the elite stepped forward, cool eyes, flat voice. There's only one rule here, he said. My group makes the rules. Silence spread like a gas leak. No pushback. No disagreement. Just quiet complicity. The rest looked away. One fiddled with his phone. Another turned his back completely. The speaker smiled. Small, sure, untouchable. And in that moment, The real message was deafening. This wasn't about policy, it was about power, and no one had dared to challenge it until now. Here, it didn't matter how hard you worked, only rank mattered, and rank belonged to those who had mastered silence, not the absence of speech, but the kind of silence born from fear, manipulation, and unchecked power. He sat at the edge of his cot, lights off, just the faint blue glow from the recorder illuminating his hands. One by one, he played the files. Laughter, smug voices, words spoken with the ease of routine. "We're getting good at this," she broke fast. "My group makes the rules." Each phrase struck like a hammer on the same nail. He wasn't just hearing cruelty, he was hearing a culture shaped by it. The foundation he once trusted was cracking beneath him. This wasn't about a few bad hires. This was decay, deep-rooted and systemic, allowed to flourish in the absence of accountability. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, breathing slow, not from fatigue, but restraint. Anger wouldn't fix this. What he needed was precision, timing, and truth. The recordings weren't just evidence. They were a mirror, and what they reflected back wasn't failure, it was negligence. His. But that would change. He stared at the ceiling, hands clasped over his chest, recorder now silent. The room around him remained still, but inside, his thoughts raced. "I trusted the system," he admitted to himself, trusted the numbers, the reports, the managers who never walked the floor. He had believed in delegation, in autonomy, in building something that could run on its own. But systems don't fix themselves, and silence never means health. "I let it go too long," he thought, regret curdling in his chest. He had praised results without asking how they were earned. The good ones, the loyal, the kind, the quiet, hadn't spoken up, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't believe anyone would listen. Now, finally, someone was listening, but it had already cost too much. He stood before the mirror, the same one he had faced every morning for decades. But today, he didn't see a CEO. He saw a man who had been absent for far too long. With care, he unzipped the protective coverall. It slipped from his shoulders like a shed skin. Stains smudged the sleeves. The warehouse smell still clung to the fibers. He folded it neatly and set it aside, then turned to the navy blue suit hanging on the wall. One button at a time, he dressed himself in what the world still saw him as: crisp collar, polished shoes, and a steady resolve. This wasn't a costume anymore. It was a declaration, a return to ownership, not of power, but of accountability. He adjusted his tie, not out of vanity but clarity. Then he looked into his reflection and said nothing. Tomorrow, he would walk through the front doors, not as one of them, but as the one who had finally seen them all. The lights in the room were dim. His bag was packed, files organized, recordings backed up, a clear timeline outlined. He stood at the window, staring out at the city, its lights twinkling like 1,000 unanswered questions. Below, the warehouse slept beneath its own shadow, but he knew now what lurked in that silence. His fingers tapped lightly against the table, measured, purposeful. No more observing, no more waiting, no more pretending. He exhaled, slow, controlled, then whispered into the quiet. "Tomorrow we start over." Not with apologies, not with vague promises, but with truth, clear, unfiltered, and undeniable. The reckoning was no longer a threat. It was already moving. At exactly 6:07 a.m., the email went out. Subject: mandatory all-staff meeting, 10 o'clock a.m. No explanation, no agenda, just a final line. Attendance required, no exceptions. Phones buzzed, Screens lit up across the warehouse. Whispers flew. Do you know what this is about? Is someone getting fired? Maybe another restructure? The elite group shared glances, some amused, others curious. One shrugged, muttering, "Probably nothing. We've seen these before." But this time the air was different, thicker, charged. By 9 a.m. the break room filled. Conversation hushed, movements slow. Some leaned against counters, others buried their faces in their phones, waiting. And the door opened. He stepped in. No uniform, no clipboard, no mop. A tailored suit, calm eyes, a presence few had ever seen in person. Recognition hit like a cold wind. Heads turned, eyes widened. Someone whispered, "That's him." The room fell silent. The smirks disappeared. Conversations died. He said nothing, just stood there, letting the silence grow roots, letting them sit in the discomfort of an unfamiliar power dynamic. Because for once, they weren't the ones in control. And they knew, even before a word was spoken, something irreversible had begun. He placed a small remote on the table, clicked. The wall screen flickered. A grainy video appeared, silent at first, but immediately familiar. The warehouse floor, their voices, their faces. She broke fast. That one didn't last a week. That's 5 now. Easy. Someone shifted in their chair. Another looked down. The video continued. Let him feel it. Give the old guy a taste. Then, my group makes the rules. The room held its breath. The silence wasn't safe anymore. It was damning. The longer it played, the heavier it became, like stones stacked on shoulders. One voice broke. "You can't do this. You had no right to record us." He stood, half risen, trembling. "This is illegal, isn't it? You didn't say anything. You set us up." But no one backed him. No one repeated the protest. Because they knew. This wasn't entrapment. This was the truth. And they had spoken it themselves. The CEO said nothing. He didn't need to. Their own voices had become the prosecution. Then another clip. "He won't last the week. Let's keep the pressure on." Heads turned. The speaker shrank into his chair. Next clip. The new guy unload it all. "No help. Let him crack." The camera caught his face in full. No denying it. No blur, no excuse. The CEO's eyes drifted to the wall. A framed photo hung there. Employee of the month. Same face. He didn't say a word. Let the irony settle. The man they trusted, praised, promoted, was the architect of cruelty. And then from the back of the room, a voice broke through. Steady, clear, unshaken. "I've had this email written for 3 months. Heads turned. It was someone quiet, unremarkable, neutral. "Until now. I saw what they did to her," he said. "I watched them lie. I watched people disappear." And just like that, the silence cracked, and truth started pouring in. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Holding it up with trembling fingers, he said, "I never sent it. I didn't think it would matter, or worse, that it would come back on me." His voice cracked once before he steadied it with a slow breath. "But watching those clips, hearing my own silence, that's worse." He turned to the CEO, then looked across the room at faces once so sure of their own safety. "I won't stay quiet anymore." And in that small, vulnerable moment, the room shifted, not because someone had spoken, but because someone had finally stopped hiding. He stepped forward, shoulders squared now. "No one's being dragged out of here today," he said, calm but unshakable. "But you do have a choice." The room stilled. Even the air seemed to wait. Calmed, you leave. Right now, no recommendation, no second chance. A few employees shifted, uncomfortable. One exhaled sharply. Two, you stay, but you apologize publicly to every person whose name you've damaged. Then, you go through 6 months of retraining, real oversight, no shortcuts, no excuses. He let it settle. You won't keep your title. You won't keep your comfort. Someone whispered bitterly, "That's worse than leaving." He nodded, without anger. Then leave. It wasn't punishment, it was accountability, and for the first time, the power wasn't in their hands. No one spoke. The silence stretched, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock and the low hum of the ceiling lights. Then, movement. A woman stood slowly, her eyes glistening, not with drama, with quiet resolution. She walked out without a word. Another man followed, head bowed, hands trembling. No bag, no excuses. A third sat frozen, biting the inside of his cheek so hard it bled, eyes fixed on the floor. Two more exchanged a look, one that once meant confidence, now hollow. They rose and left. Some stayed, arms crossed, chins up, choosing pride over growth. But others, they looked different. Lost, as if waking from a spell they didn't know had been cast. No yelling, no slamming doors, just the slow unraveling of a power structure that had mistaken silence for strength. And it wasn't over. He remained behind, not to gloat, not to reflect. There was one more conversation he needed to have. He found the old man alone, as always, straightening the last chairs, folding the mop, quiet, consistent. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" the CEO asked. The old man nodded, hesitant, wiping his hands on the faded towel from his back pocket. They stepped into a small office, no cameras, no audience, just two men who had lived the same storm from opposite ends. "You've been here 15 years, the CEO began. "And in that time, you've done more for this place than most ever noticed." He paused. "I noticed." The old man didn't smile, but his eyes shifted, just enough to show he'd waited years to hear that. The CEO leaned forward. "I want you to lead," he said. "Not just a shift, the whole team, full-time management. Starting next week." The old man blinked, looked down, his fingers clenched the towel. "I'm honored," he said, voice low, cracked with use. "Truly." He swallowed, then continued. "But I've spent too many years cleaning up after others, quietly, without asking why. I'm too tired now to lead people who never saw me." Silence followed. "I don't need a title," he said. "I just want to finish strong. Go home. Find a little peace." The CEO nodded. No resistance. Because leadership, he realized, isn't always about standing in front. Sometimes it's about staying steady. "Where you've always been, with dignity." 3 months passed. The warehouse still buzzed, machines still hummed, but something else had changed. People greeted each other, not out of habit, but with meaning. Names were spoken. New hires weren't abandoned. Questions were answered. No sighs, no shrugs. Tasks were shared, not dumped. Laughter still echoed, but now it healed instead of hurt. The old man still cleaned the break room, still stacked chairs. But now, someone helped him fold them. Someone stayed behind to sweep. Not because they were told, because they chose to. No banners were raised, no speeches given. But you could feel it in how people showed up, in how they stayed. The culture wasn't rewritten. It was reset. Quietly, slowly, and finally for the better. An afternoon near the loading zone, 4 new hires stood in a line, fresh uniforms, anxious eyes. In front of them stood a familiar figure. The same man who had once eaten alone, who had once cleaned unnoticed. Now he was the one explaining how to load safely, how to flag broken equipment, where to find what they needed. His tone? Steady, gentle, patient. One fumbled with a strap. He stepped in, showed them again. No sigh, no scorn, just care. And they listened. Not out of fear, but trust. He had no title, no badge of rank, just presence. And sometimes, the best leaders are the ones who never forget what it felt like to be forgotten. Just outside the break room, where the old plaque once hung, a new sign had taken its place. Simple, unbranded, no corporate logo. It read, "Be the teammate you once needed." People stopped to read it. Some touched the frame. It wasn't flashy, it didn't tell them what to do, but it reminded them of first days, of silent moments, of things they didn't speak up about, but wished they had. Now it stood not as policy, but as promise. Culture isn't born in handbooks, it's built in moments, one choice at a time, one person at a time. Late one night, the CEO opened his laptop. Amid reports and updates, one message stood out. No subject, no signature. Just a name he recognized. One of the former core team, one who had walked out. He clicked. You read, "You probably don't want to hear from me. I wouldn't blame you, but I needed to say it anyway. Back then I thought control meant respect. I thought silence meant strength. I was wrong. Watching those clips, seeing myself, you didn't humiliate me. You woke me up. That version of me needed to end. So thank you. I've started over, and this time, I want to earn it." He stared at the screen, long and quiet. Some lessons don't land until the noise fades. He stood by the office window. Below, the team moved together, new faces, familiar ones, not perfect, but present. He thought of those who'd left, those who'd stayed, and those who'd suffered in silence for far too long. Then he spoke, not to them, to anyone who might listen. A toxic culture doesn't just push the best people out, it teaches the good ones to stay quiet. He paused. Until someone decides to speak. And that's all it takes. One voice, one moment, one decision to say, "Not anymore." He turned from the window. The story was no longer his. It was theirs. And maybe now finally it was yours too.